Manly Hall official, is glad to produce, publish and offer. Cranks and crankyisms as factors in indigestions. There is that divine state of being into which it is possible for individuals to adjust themselves, which humanity knows as harmony and equilibrium. This is the ultimate to which all creatures are striving, for balance is the keynote to power and success. But how seldom we find it in our world of affairs. The human race is mostly made up of extremists, and there is no doubt that the extremes of all problems are well symbolized as the two thieves between whom the Master was crucified. The world is filled with people who live on tangents and die on angles, and whenever a great truth is discovered, it always gathers around it those who do it more harm than good. They are usually people who have been atheists all their lives, are converted at the 11th hour, and there are none as hopelessly bigoted in their religious viewpoints as those whose conversion is recent. They are the ones who warn you that unless you go to church regularly you will sizzle eternally in the post-mortem state, and many a man has been damned heartily and eternally because he would not agree with someone else who has only been saved about 2 weeks. These problems are ever with us, and now dietetics is forming a neutral point around and over which tremendous battles are being waged. The problem before the house is, resolve that eating is a dangerous, barbaric, unscientific form of nourishment and should be eliminated, or, if still with us, all gastronomic influxes should be according to science. There is no doubt in the world that dietetics molds to a great degree the consciousness of individuals, for man is in truth what he eats. But there are other considerations which must be taken up and examined in the study of this extremely problem. Each individual is building qualities and traits different from all other people, and these qualities require certain elements which differ with the growth of each person. There is an undisputed fact confronting modern science, and that is the average member of the human race is making a garbage pail, if not worse, out of his stomach by placing in it combinations which would blow into atoms if gathered in a chemical retort. In many cases, not only does the food we eat place us in mortal peril, but it also endangers the unfoldment of our immortal spirit. The combinations of food which the rank and file of people incorporate into their organisms in the name of a meal not only lack all constructive elements but are often of such a decidedly dangerous nature as to result in spontaneous combustion upon the slightest provocation. Education is needed in dietetics as in all physical and superphysical sciences, but the value of the science depends upon the balance, common sense, and efficiency of the instructor. The average dietetic specialist whose life is narrowed to proteins and carbohydrates is not in a position to make an intelligent analysis of either food qualities or the needs of his patient. The ancient philosophers were right when they said a man who knows only one thing knows nothing. If you're enjoying this video and finding value in the content, we kindly ask you to take a moment to subscribe to the channel. A large portion of our listeners and viewers haven't subscribed yet, and by doing so, you'll help us grow and continue bringing you more high-quality audiobooks. Your support means a lot to us, and it's just one click away. So, go ahead and hit that subscribe button to stay connected and never miss out on our latest releases. There is a great deal of difference between a food expert and a crank who claims to be, and they can only be differentiated when we follow to some degree the dictates of common sense. There is no doubt that a large percentage of our population is suffering from stomach trouble, and while much of it is the result of improper diet, Not a few cases are due to the frenzied notions of specialists along these lines. There are many of these mental, physical, and spiritual musicians who are playing on one string and trying to produce heavenly harmony when the only sound that issues forth is a rather hashified discord in which the food specialist finally becomes so wound up in his dietetic outbursts that neither God, man nor dynamite can disentangle him. The truly great dietetic expert knows that there is no magic formula that will bring the world health. He knows that each individual is a problem in himself, and that the food qualities which will kill one man will save another. The true scientist is a specialist in the analysis of human individuality. The true food expert realizes that the diet for each individual must be different and that no set series of personally evolved laws will ever answer the problem of indigestion. Stomach trouble has two causes. First, ignorance. Second, indolence. These two are behind practically every human infirmity. Under the general heading of indolence are those people for whom it is too great an exertion to chew and properly masticate food, or who are too lazy to exercise sufficiently to create an appetite or dispose of a dinner. The second class, the ignorant group, lists in its ranks those who do not know what nor how to eat, and includes no small percentage of our so-called food experts who generally have about as many pains as their patients do. There is no greater cause in all the world for sour stomach than a certain fraternity which is springing up among occultists and dietitians. Their slogan is, "Thou shalt not." They are forever with us. Every time we lift a fork, gracefully balancing a luscious baked bean, a voice like the dying gull whispers in our ear, "Thou shalt not, or thou shalt die." Beware, brother, there is protein in that bean. What greater cause for stomach discomfiture is there than to see these gloomy ones sitting round us at the festive board, munching hour after hour and predigesting in mathematical sequence the corner of a lettuce leaf or a handful of cold slaw? Or to hear that melancholy cadence which rises as would-be Methuselahs chew graham crackers, whole bran biscuits, or imported Zwieback, making us feel that our neighbor is gnawing on granite headstones in some outlying cemetery? There is nothing so apt to bring on indigestion as to find beside us at a pleasing meal that spirit of negation who whispers that the pickled cauliflower we love so well will bring on fluttering of the liver or involve some nameless nerve in a compromising situation. We hate to be wound up in some mental hazard, or to be bound down by the strings of the beans we eat, and then have some individual, the living incarnation of failure, dyspepsia, and liver trouble, tell us in a voice rising from the depths of his goulashes of the damning effect of orange ice if eaten a la shrimp. The true food expert will never make himself obnoxious, for he realizes that when he does so he loses all opportunity to be useful either to himself or his brother man. There is nothing that nauseates an individual more, irritates his gastric nerve so close to the breaking point, or sprinkles grit in his liver pins more quickly than one of those who in the name of health bring sickness with their very presence. And many of our foremost faddists are more dangerous to general health than mushrooms which turn the aluminum green when you cook them. There is no class of people in the world so dangerous as fanatics and soapbox orators. As long as they will confine their faddisms to themselves, all goes well for this a free country. But they do not seem to be happy unless they are inoculating the entire neighborhood with their concept. There is no doubt that carbon, proteins, vitamins, starches, carbohydrates, etc., not to mention carbolic acid, strychnine, turpentine, and home brew will cause trouble if taken in too large quantities. We will not dispute the fact that sauerkraut and French pastry have an antipathy based upon racial characteristics. Lobsters with whipped cream may also produce irritations and convulsions to the inner man. These gathered together may embarrass us, said embarrassments taking the form of rheumatism, diabetes, uric acid poisoning, toothache, dandruff, glanders, falling arches, rupee and blind staggers. But for some utterly unknown reason the average individual gets sicker when you tell him this than when he eats the food. Few like to be reminded of such contingencies, especially at mealtime. The occultist must realize that the doctrine he is preaching is of tolerance, and where dietetics does not receive a ready welcome, then has come the moment for the dietetic expert to gracefully retire. When he ceases to be tolerant of the desires of others, makes himself obnoxious with his personally evolved ideas, and runs his fads into the ground, he loses all his opportunity to be of use, takes all the joy out of life, and so prejudices people against dietetics that those who do have common sense and really do know can accomplish but little. Moderation is the keynote to all things, and politeness and consideration for the feelings of others form a very important phase of philosophy. Those who lose sight of the requirements of social etiquette and who go to another man's house, pick the meals to pieces and ruin the appetites of all members of the family, at the same time eating the condemned vitals heartily and with relish, such a person has small chance of being listed with the immoral benefactors of humanity. Ranters, roarers, and rearers will never gain any great amount of success. Neither will those who try to force their opinions upon the world without giving the other person the privilege of declining them. Each has the right to do what he wants. If he exercises too much freedom and becomes too spontaneous in his outbursts of unleashed exuberance, he will be quietly reminded of it in civil matters by the judge, in gastric matters by his stomach, and in religious matters by a visit from the parson. The great trouble at the present time seems to be that there are too many people taking an interest in other people's affairs, and after half a dozen near occultists have expressed their opinions on our needs, we know a great deal less than before they started. We tear our hair, perhaps the last one from our head, with a cry of dismay, and they put new furniture in our padded cells. While we have tried to follow a complete gamut of occult advice, our beloved ones gather round, shake their heads, and whisper, "He may get over it, Hut, he'll never be the same." Now it just so happens that we have a friend who has been suffering for many years from acute pandemonium of the pancreas and palpitation of the pneumogastric nerve, which information costs slim $10 to discover. The name of our poor, suffering fellow countryman is Ebenezer J. Weiss. For some time he has been trying to get the inside information on this deep inside inflammation, and has applied to several scintillating exponents of dietetic science. He is a friend who talks in his sleep, wears his hat on one ear, and only shaves occasionally, who is an eminent authority on the food subject. He suggested that Ebenezer live on alfalfa and goat curds for about 3 months, after which he was to discard the curds and take up predigested prunes and unsalted pretzels. Not feeling capable of making the experiment himself, Uncle Ebenezer tried it on the cat, who went into convulsions and has had a bleared look ever since. From that day to this, Tabby's tail swells up every time the word dietetics is mentioned, and can only find under the back stoop when there are any food experts around. From him Mr. Weiss went to another eminent authority on the subject of what to eat and how to eat it. Mr. Slump is a small man about 5'2", weighs 90 pounds, has spinal curvature and false teeth, but otherwise is a perfect picture of health. Mr. Slump analyzed it as overproteins and told Ebenezer that raw cabbage and bran crackers had made him what he is today and would do the same for Ebenezer. E.B. was not entirely satisfied with the example of the finished product. Hut decided to try it, and in correlation with wild onion honey and some newfangled spring water which tasted like burnt sulfur, he went into a state of agony lasting several weeks. One day a perfect stranger came up on the street to Ebenezer and after measuring him from head to foot a small tape measure handed him a card bearing the name of a well-known undertaking concern with a list of several beautiful plots just his size in a nearby cemetery. The same mysterious stranger also mentioned casually that silver handles were being done this year. This decided Ebenezer that the results of his labors were not harmonious with his continued manifestation on this plane of nature, so he desisted from his diet and applied to another expert. Professor Theodore Sneezix is now deceased, having died of convulsions a few weeks ago as the result of having eaten meat. He found a red ant in his raw spinach. His suggestion was a 10-day fast with a half a glass of orange juice every other day. Ebenezer tried this also but couldn't get the orange juice the last 2 days, not being able to walk. Henceforward he had a dark brown taste, or rather ashen feeling, and a dusty look. In other words, Ebenezer was slowly returning to Mother Matter. At the end of the 5th month the insurance company raised his rate, the worst risk in the office, and his great-grand-uncle, who wanted his old clothes, suggested that he make his will. For this experiment it took him about 8 months to build up. Life had become just one food expert after another with Uncle Ebenezer, and he honestly tried it. Follow all their advice. He sharpened his fangs on caraway seed, sliced belladonna plasters, and flaxseed gruel. 1 month he hung a piece of cuttlefish bone in the middle of the room and chewed on that, gnawed on unbaked pie crust, chewed hickory bark, ate raw beets, decked himself out in parsley, tried a strange and mysterious concoction at the half-baked bakery, used grated raw potatoes, ate garlic and Limburger, and as a last resort tried chewing navy beans, split peas, and unsalted licorice bars. And day by day in every way he grew weaker and weaker. He tried 1 meal a day and then increased them to 5 a day. He lay down for eating, and again after eating, exercised while eating by having his dinner placed on a shelf and snapping at it, tried funnels and sponges, straws and rubber tubing, chewed each mouthful 10 times, then 20 times, and then tried swallowing it whole until finally he had experimented with every known method of torture conceivable to the human brain. At the end of 1 full year he had galloping jim jams and a general ictus vicissitude which threatened to be fatal. Several leading doctors gathered and opened a symposium on the strength of his pocketbook, announcing as the result of a deeply heated discussion that Ebenezer was infected with creeping heaves and chronic staggers. He had been miserable beyond expression, sickened to the breaking point, had developed crow's feet, a mean disposition, 3 bunions, and broken up 3 homes. As he staggered down the street, tottering beneath the weight of gray hairs to an untimely grave, supported by a crutch and a few of his relatives, an old friend came up and slapped him on the hack, nearly jarring loose his upper plate and disconnecting his spark plug, saying, "Old man, you look down and out. Have you been watching your diet?" Whereupon Ebenezer gave a low gurgle, draped himself upon his friend's arms, and sinking upon the sidewalk stretched out heel toes while the crowds gathered announcing it apoplexy. When he awoke several days later, he was staring into the face of an eminent food scientist who was feeding him barley gruel through an eyedropper. The relapse was nearly fatal. At last, a shattered and broken wreck, he wandered alone in a heartless world, no longer able to eat a square meal because the corners scraped against some tender of his insides. About this time the seventh daughter of a seventh son, address unknown, age, who gave him the secret of longevity. She advised less worry, moderation in all things, and common sense. Hope returned, for it springs eternal in the human heart. After applying this simple recipe for a short time, Ebenezer found that it worked like a charm. He excluded things which he knew were not good for him, ate moderately of a well-balanced diet, enjoyed everything he ate, and ate nearly everything he enjoyed, but all in moderation and with care. He soon found the qualifications of youth returning, his fallen arches raised, and a rubber-heel temperament returned. He could do 100 yards and nothing flat, won the old man hurdle race, did 18 holes of golf, chopped 5 cords of wood before dinner, and could pick up the average dietitian under one arm with his following under the other. His false teeth took root, and he chewed the corner off of Webster's Unabridged. This is the little story. Pure food and the highest of ideals plus well-balanced cooking and moderate eating bring with them health. Our hearts are very strongly with those who are fighting so bravely to prevent the murder of innocent animals for food and furs, not just because the meat makes them sick, but because of a higher regard for our younger brothers in the lower kingdom. We are heart and soul with all who are seeking to help man have better bodies and better minds, and there are none who have a greater opportunity to help than those who labor with the mystery of the food which man eats. But let all be masters of their sciences rather than becoming slaves to them. Help people where they are to see things better, but never become a crank or faddist, for to do otherwise will only list you with the causes of the very troubles you are seeking to remove. Courage versus timidity. It must be true that even the bravest occasionally have those qualms of timidity which show out so strangely from the dun-colored atmosphere of everyday life. We want to present to you a few examples of human idiosyncrasies and let you judge for yourselves the cause and cure of these conditions. Only a few days ago we watched a perfectly contented workman, a member of the Riveters Union, eating his lunch halfway out on the end of a suspended girder about 250 feet above the ground. He was joking and talking to his pal who was sitting in the noose of a rope about the same height above the street, swinging back and forth with a ham sandwich in one hand and a bowl of near beer in the other. They were the perfect picture of contentment in spite of the mere nothingness that stretched out beneath them. They showed no signs of either nervousness or worry. To them these excitements were part of the routine of life and passed practically unnoticed. But that has his weak point. He must get home every night by 5 p.m., as he is in mortal terror of the wrath of Mrs. Murphy, who holds more horror for him than 16 stories of rarefied ether. And his companion with the sandwich is paying Dr. Sokum 3/4 of his salary because he has a strange pain inside which is frightening him to death. He worries over it day and night, thinks nothing of swinging at the end of said rope by one hand like some genial anthropoid. In the course of our wanderings we also come across Captain Gustav Gasp, a well-known aviator, who does all the latest fancy aeronautics. He is strapped into his machine that he may do tailspins and nosedives and turn 19 somersaults on a dime. Captain Gasp fully realizes that a broken wire or the slightest derangement of the mechanism of his machine would hurt him to an untimely end, but still he plays with the ether bubbles in divine unconcern. But then Captain Gasp is scared to death of a certain little wart on the end of his nose, and every time anyone glances at him his face bursts into various colored blushes which stream out as halos of mortification from behind that tiny wart. He is so bashful that he doesn't even dare to look anyone in the face because he knows they are making fun of his nose. In the same class we find Reginald Glewfoot the human fly who plays pool with the brass ball on top of the town flagpole, also Jimmy Shine, our well-known window washer who unhesitatingly clings to the windowsill of the enstinth story of the Blazin' Fire Insurance Company, whistling "My Country 'Tis of Thee," while thousands of people down below open their mouths in amazement just in time to have them filled with suds. Now Reginald Glewfoot is a man of affairs. He is held on by one finger and chinned windowsills with his thumbnail 1,000 times, but he will go around the very picture of misery if his necktie happens to be a little crooked. He has matrimonial difficulties and being a man of prominence rushes in terror to the newspaper offices at regular intervals praying that they will not air his domestic problems. He is more afraid of the newspaper than of 29 stories of abstracted vacuum. He is frightened to death of public opinion, and every time anyone even whispers his name he breaks out in cold sweat. With Jimmy Shine it is different. He is afraid of neither space nor time and would as soon hang on to a comet's tail as walk down Broadway. But Jimmy will not work on Friday. This scared to death of black cats, and all the money in 10 kingdoms couldn't make Jimmy walk under a ladder or go against the dictates of his ruling planet. About this time Rebecca McFadden goes over Niagara Falls in an eggshell, following this with a dive from the 15th story of the City Hall into a fire net. While she was receiving the applause someone told her that she had a hole in her stocking, whereupon she fainted from stark horror. Joseph Teasum is a man who was loosened into a brass cage with 16 ferocious lions and glorified in the experience. This same individual, however, is very bashful, and when he was loosened among some doting admirers of the fair sex, his terror was so great that he went into convulsions and died, his last words being, "If they had only allowed me to fight 10 man-eating sharks instead of bringing me into this social swim, I'd have been all right." Sylvester Slide, the world's famous ski jumper, jumped 218 feet and landed on a track 4 feet wide where a single slip meant death. He does this 3 times a week for the consideration of $10 per each. But if anyone suggested that he go out without shaving, he wouldn't dare to stick his nose between the portals. Now, friends, we will ask you once more why an individual who is willing to swing from the end of a rope ladder by his toes is afraid to contradict the person. How comes it that an individual who is perfectly willing to take a parachute jump into the Atlantic is afraid to grow whiskers when his wife says no? We repeat, why is it? Abstractions. One of the greatest curses that confronts the student of occult philosophy is his inability to get any real information. He is flooded with concepts and abstractions, but not one of them is capable of solving the practical problem. There is no greater abstraction on the face of the earth than the word truth, which covers every doctrine and misquotation known to man. We are told that truth is the answer to the problem, but we are not told what truth is. Those who claim to have it demonstrate only an abstract condition which cannot possibly be true because it does not answer any problem, solve any difficulty, nor educate the human mind in any practical way. Such words as truth, love, God, Yah, I, and realization are of them absolutely abstract. We do not know whether the light referred to is gas, electric, or spiritual, and if spiritual, we have no idea of its dimensions, power, use, or means or perpetuation. Our so-called students of New Thought pepper their entire phraseology with these abstractions, which mean absolutely nothing to average heathens like us, but are used like Latin phrases by the professional people to conceal the sum of human ignorance. So we humbly request that these words only be used in connection with concrete, descriptive adjectives, and that the process he explained along with the nouns in question. There is no greater abstraction in the world than to say, believe in God. I have never met anyone who has the slightest idea of what God is, and not one in a million knows the mental alchemy which must be passed through in order to hatch a belief. The average individual does not know how to believe anything. The statement "be good" is first cousin to the above. Have two individuals ever come to a mutual understanding as to what is right and wrong? Good and had been relative terms, and have no earthly bearing upon the path of attainment. Next door to these two is the emphasis of the am, which we find so often such statements as "I am God." These phrases and paraphrases come forth with ease and fluency, but the realization of either the I am or God is impossible for the 2x4-minded person who robs these bits of language so unctuously under its tongue. It sounds good, but it don't mean nothing. Man can only understand in a hazy way even the first principles of religion, and to do so the most careful primer is necessary, one which garbs every ideal in the most simple language in order that any sort of an understanding may be attained. We know people who have realizations, who are living in the light and who are saved, and when they say these things they say everything, for they couldn't explain the process to save their neck. They have accepted some mental aphorism or tied themselves to a parrot-like concept and use it as the basis of their salvation. We are sorry for them, but they do not seem to be very sorry for themselves, so we can do no more. We humbly suggest that each individual analyze his belief and find out whether or not he has any foundation other than a concept for his phase of religion. When he says, "Know the law," we expect an individual with a Darwinian intellect and a Spencerian brogue, a disciple of Platonic reason and a master of a priori and a posteriori reasoning, to whom the mysteries of the universe are an open book and who can tell just how many granules there are in a ham sandwich, etc. Instead of this, he is some perfectly ignorant individual who doesn't even know that Spencer is sick or whether he passed out some years ago. He comes up to us in sublime and colossal ignorance and tells us that he knows the law and is saved, when he has never even been formally introduced to common sense. He tells us that he is the victim of a revelation, and we listen expectantly for a continuation of his divine discourse on Patmos, but nothing follows the first statement. He merely informs us that he has found the real. Having found it, Is he unable to even tell where it is? A party came up to us a short time ago to tell us that she was in truth. We immediately visualized the molten sea, fed by the outpourings of living water, streaming from the souls of Zoroaster, Buddha, Krishna, and Confucius. Having 3 or 4 questions we have never been able to answer, we immediately were filled with a great hope that the individual who had just arrived in truth might be able to illuminate us on some dark corners and tear the veil from our mortal vision. We started in with an easy one, being desirous of knowing just how long the Paleozoic period lasted. We received nothing but a blank look with a hole in the center, so feeling that we may have misjudged the ray, we presented our second difficulty, namely, why has the Chinese dragon 5 toes? The individual addressed took on an injured expression this time, and we politely refrained from further questioning for fear that we were offending her delicate nerves. But when this person asked us with all seriousness whether the earth revolved around the moon or nay, we began to doubt the source of their illumination and began to seek the basis of the declaration that they had discovered truth. We found as usual that they only thought they had paid sufficient for it to buy a house and lot. It was an aphorism dealing in a hazy way upon the relationship between truth and illness, and so of course this put them in the light hut. Their children still continue to have whooping cough every winter, and they still spend half their time under the influence of aspirin. It is a sad thing that we should have so much illumination and no light, so much knowledge and no wisdom, so much thought and no philosophy, so much logic and no reason. But we suppose it is the result of the rapid growth of minds and the tremendous influx of illumination. It must probably be that the mind is growing so rapidly that it is devouring all the brain cells. We cannot help agreeing with the ancient philosopher who said, "Oh, man, the mirror of vanity. He reflects the glory of the universe but inhales only the empty ethers. The blow in the dark." Under the direction of the master, I had been carrying on my work for several years in London with ever greater success. The soul hunger of the world, long debarred from light, had awakened in them the desire for further illumination upon the intricate problems of life. Each day I came into closer contact with the souls of men and women who were seeking in a great darkness for a light which neither theology nor science was capable of giving them. With these I worked, laboring to give to them the light which poured into me from the gray-robed figure of the initiate. The strange feeling that came over me when I first met that great one never entirely vanished, but the nervousness and the great chill of his presence slowly left until only an indescribable something told me when he was near. I did not often see him, but sometimes upon awaking in the morning I would look for a brief moment into a face which seemed floating in the air before me and which trailed off into a nothingness as I went about the work of the day. Within my own being a great light was being born. I could feel a twisting, turning something in my own body as a mighty serpent struggling for freedom, and by this I knew that the light of the Master was slowly developing and nurturing the spark of itself within my own soul. Each day I came closer to communion with myself, closer to the realization of my own work. More and more the unseen worlds opened to me, until I seemed an inhabitant of many planes. But with it all remained that something so often subtle human touch and the mortal simplicity. One evening as I sat alone in my study, before me a number of manuscripts which I was preparing for publication in European journals, I felt that inscrutable something which I knew to be the presence of the teacher. Surely enough, he walked from behind my chair, around to the side of the great reading lamp and sank into an overstuffed chair beside me, his deep black eyes and slender graceful form seeming strangely out of place among the prosaic surroundings of Modem London. "Your work is going well," the master spoke in his soft yet deep and overpowering lanes. "You have met the obstacles that have confronted you honestly and truly, but your ever-awakening power and the ever-broadening circle of your work is bringing you before the eyes of many people, not all of whom will accept or understand your message. There is also in the world not only the power of light, but the power of opposition, and as surely as the message you are giving broadens, so surely this growing light invokes the power of the shadow. Lust as our sacred order has its temple in the heart of the Himalayas from which it pours forth into the world its streams of life and power, so surely there dwells in the shadows of these mountain peaks the powers of darkness. Be ever on your guard, be ever true to the light that you have, be ever prepared, for from the home of the black light has issued forth a rumbling. The work you have done has reached their notice, and in 1,000 ways they will attack you, and through many innocent people whom they use as tools will seek to thwart the spreading of this sacred wisdom. Beware, my son, for they fight not with the weapons of light, but with the weapons of darkness." I turned to the teacher. "Master," I questioned, "what is there to fear when you are near? How can the powers of darkness injure that which is ordained of the light? What power in heaven, earth or hell should I fear?" "Thou shouldst fear nothing, my son, for fear is a brooder of demons. Fear not, but neither be rash. The power of night is ruler of 1/2 the circle of the hours, and is equal in strength and power with the light of dawn." The master and I then talked for several moments on other problems of the spreading of the work, of the labor of other cellists in the world, and arrangements were made for the cooperation of future work. "There is one in London now," said the master, "whom you should know, one who passed into the Temple of Caves 50 years before you did, and was the only one before you came who had entered it in 3 centuries. She took her initiation in the Western Hemisphere, but was taken by the master out of her physical body, which remained in a state of coma for 14 days, and carried over the top of the Himalaya mountains to Sangatsi, where she was privileged to receive the benediction of the Lord Maitreya. I have made the arrangements which are necessary for this meeting." The master took from the breast of his robe a slip of paper upon which were traced a number of figures. "You know this alphabet and this writing," he said, handing it to me. "It is the secret cipher of the adepts. This tells you where to go, and you are to meet me there at 8 o'clock this evening. 3 of the other masters will be there, and together we will outline a program for the reconstruction of our beloved world heavy beneath the weight of its self-created woes." The master rose and, walking towards the wall on the opposite side of the room, slowly passed through it and out of sight. I sat for several seconds wrapped in thought. The great moment of my life had come. I was to be taken into the circle of adepts who were the cellists of the masters of wisdom, and was to join forces in a conscious way with the molders of human destiny. A great thrill of fear came over my being. How could I enter their august presence? And then another thought came. The sweet simplicity of my master had always won my admiration, and I felt that the others too would be like him, and was reassured. The moments passed slowly until about 7:30, and then, dressing myself with the greatest care in order to make the best appearance possible, with a certain element of human vanity that still remained, I called a cab, and giving the driver a number, some few doors from the house where I intended to go, I sat back in the darkness of the car while we wound our way in and out through the evening traffic. Here and there a light shone out from some cafe or club, where England's upper set gathered, but soon the customary fog was upon us through which the lamps shone like haloed stars. I saw the great lions of Trafalgar go by an old Regent Circle, and slowly we threaded our way out into the residential section where grey stone fronts and narrow streets spoke of the London of centuries gone by. At last the cab stopped and the driver, in his heavy coat and overcape, opened the door and allowed me to descend under the gleam of a street lamp. "This is I'm," the cabbie remarked, nudging at empty space with his thumb. I tossed him a coin and, followed by many polite bows, headed along the street, my eyes turned for the numbers on the houses. At last I reached the one shown on the address and looked up at a dingy old front of the early Victorian middle class which loomed down blankly upon me. The windows were small and checkered paned, many of them broken, and the whole house seemed shaded with dissolution and death. I looked around carefully and then slowly ascended the steps which led up to the door some dozen feet above the street. I was on about the fourth step when a peculiar sensation struck me. I felt someone behind me. It was not the presence of my master, but a cruel, cold, slimy presence that brought terror to my soul. I tried to turn. As I did so, a blow struck me directly under the heart. Staggering, and my knees bending up under me, I swayed upon the step. As I did so, I had a fleeting glimpse of the figure who stood behind me, one dimly outlined in the mist of the London fog. It was a tall, heavily built form, draped in black robes, from whose hands were streaming two red-flamed bolts which seemed pounding at my heart. The figure vanished in the ethers, and at the same time something welled up into my mouth. Looking down, I saw the steps at my feet spattered with blood. Then everything grew black, and the last I remember was pitching forward and downward into the fog which seemed to rise like clouds of blackness around me. A thud which did not seem to hurt me, and a choking many lights dancing before my eyes, a confused sound as of voices, and then utter blackness. When my eyes opened, found four figures gathered around me. I could not see very clearly, but they seemed to be three men and one woman. One of the men recognized as the white-robed master. A soft musical voice spoke, "He is coming to." Another voice said, "Yes, but it was a very close call." "Who struck him?" asked the musical voice again. "It is the work of the Black School in London, believe," answered my teacher. "Brother H. has become too prominent a figure lately to escape, but I never thought they would attack him here." Suddenly the four figures broke their group and standing in a row became silent. At the same instant another figure joined them, his body and the lower part of his face completely concealed by a black broadcloth evening cape with high-tamed collar. As I watched him in my lying position, I saw tiny golden flames flickering out from all parts of his body, which seemed rather small of hone and fine of texture. He spoke in a voice which sounded strangely different, as though his larynx were of gold. "What is it?" Then he looked down at me and, leaning over, held out his hand. "Let me help you up," he suggested, and taking my hand in his, he drew me to my feet with a strength I had not dreamed he possessed. Yes, it was a close shave. But come, breath, the Spiritus Sanctus is ready, and there's work to be done. Motioning me to follow him, He entered a door which suddenly appeared out of the blackness of space and into a room lighted by a glorious carved oil lamp. The doors slowly closed and he motioned each of us to a chair. Upon the table in front of us lay a number of papers and documents, some of them sealed and others tied with many-colored ribbons and cords. Then he in the long cape discarded his garment, and I saw a pale-faced man, slender and effeminate in form, with hair rather long and a slight drooping mustache. He kept stroking his chin as though a beard, but there was none that any of us could see. "Brethren," he said, taking one of the documents and breaking it open, "this is the appointed work which is to be done at this time, and you four are appointed to do it." He turned to my master. "You, as my brother, are to take charge of this work. These three your chias will labor as you direct. I am returning to Mongolia to secure further instructions from K. When I have secured these instructions, I will mail them to you with my signet. Accept nothing else." My master bowed his white turban head. "It shall be so, brother, for you speak from them, see, which is sufficient." "Lest there be doubt," answered the pale-faced stranger. And, reaching into his vest pocket, he took therefrom a small object which he concealed in the palm of his hand. He turned towards my teacher. A pale glow reflected itself from the face of the master, and he made a strange sign upon his forehead. "It is sufficient," said my master. "It is the seal of the Mahakahan." The stranger resumed his cape, and then taking the letters laying upon the table, he turned them over to the initiate of the caves. Rising, he bowed to each entomb who stood at his departure. Only my master remained seated. "It is well, brethren," spoke the stranger, taking his hat in his hand. "We'll be in London again in November, when I shall look forward to the report of your labors. This is the year of the great benediction and is an important one for our work. May the grace of God rest upon you, and the power of his holy name protect you." And, quickly drawing the folds of his cape around him, he vanished as though he had never been. As soon as he was gone, the master spoke. "He, my son, is one of the great brothers from whom we learn the will of Vivaswati. The plans are laid. The work is at hand. Now I will explain to you your appointed parts." And, opening one of the documents, he spread out a many-colored chart upon the table, drawn in bright-colored pigments on a surface of gold beater skin. "Behold, the plan. Copyright 2025 by Manly Hall Official." Thank you for listening. Please consider to subscribe, like, and share to help the channel growth. New videos on a daily basis.